Welcome to Missouri Law Matters, a podcast all about your Missouri courts. My name is Matt Hamner. I'm a judge on the Missouri Court of Appeals for the Southern District based in Springfield, Missouri. Thank you all for being with us today. And if you've been enjoying our podcast, don't forget to like and subscribe on your podcast service of choice. We're on Apple, Spotify, and all the various places you get your podcasts. In addition, if you want to see our smiling faces along with hearing our audio, you can check us out on YouTube. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe to the Supreme Court of Missouri's Facebook and Instagram page, as well as our new Missouri Courts Facebook and Instagram page. There you can leave us some comments, let us know how we're doing, let us know if there's questions that you have, or give us some ideas for things that you'd like us to discuss in the future. I'm really excited about our guest today. The Missouri Supreme Court is the highest court in the state of Missouri. It is responsible for not only hearing and deciding some of the most important legal cases affecting our state, but also is the hub through which most things involving the Missouri court system are managed and monitored. It's truly a mammoth undertaking, and at the heart of those responsibilities is the clerk of our Missouri Supreme Court. She is the conductor who keeps all the trains on the tracks. I'm very excited today to have as my guest Betsy Ledgerwood, the clerk of the Missouri Supreme Court.
Hello,
Betsy,
Matt. Good to be here.
thank you for being here today.
Or do you prefer Judge Hamner?
I prefer Matt today.
All right.
Whenever I'm not wearing the robe, Matt works just fine.
Perfect.
So tell me, Betsy, for those of us that are watching and listening today, how long have you been the clerk of the Missouri Supreme Court?
So I started in my role as clerk the 1st of January of 2017. So 8 years.
Let's talk about where you started, where you grew up, and how you got on this path to ending up as a clerk of the Missouri Supreme Court.
Yeah. So what is the Grateful Dead said, what a long, strange trip it's been. I'm so amazed by people who have a path or they have this thing that they want to do, because I just considered it to be a whole bunch of happy accidents that maybe even at certain times didn't feel that happy, but fundamentally believe I'm where I'm supposed to be. Just could have never predicted it. One, I would have never told you I wanted to be clerk because I didn't even know what that was or that was a thing. And that was even after I became a lawyer. I didn't understand what that role was. But originally, I'm from a very small town of about 500 people in South Central Missouri. I make that distinction because it's very important when you're from South Central Missouri to acknowledge you're not part of the Boot Heel, nor are you part of the Southwest Corner. It's a very rural area, a beautiful area, but not a lot of people who have ever left. I'm one of my few family members who ever have. First lawyer that anyone remembers from that area in recent history, at least. I think my first exposure to Jefferson City was in a sophomore pilgrimage. My grandmother brought me, and I remember just driving into this town, and there was this energy that I could immediately sort of taste and feel, and knew that I would always be back. That's how probably the bug first ever hit me, is in that way.
That's really incredible. You know, I too grew up in a smaller town, more of a vacation area like the Ozarks, but about 45 minutes away from Jeff City. Jefferson City was the closest large city to where we were when I grew up, and so we would travel here frequently. And I agree, as a kid, when you kind of grow up in a rural area and you come to Jeff City, even though they're those that may live in bigger cities around the country and even in the state of Missouri may say, oh, Jefferson City is not a big town. It's not that big. Well, it sure seemed big.
Yeah, there were stoplights.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
And you're right that the energy was just kind of palpable, especially for a grade school or high school age kid who's coming for the first time to see something like that. It was really amazing. Do you remember was legislative session going on?
Yeah, legislative session was in. It was probably about April. Wendell Bailey, who was from kind of the same area, was the state treasurer at the time and spoke to the group. And I mean, what I remember about it is my mother and I actually, when I was 10, we were in a horrific car accident. I spent a month in a hospital, lots of interventions, medical interventions after that. It was the first time I'd ever met a lawyer, because for our insurance purposes, we had a lawyer, had to go to court, had spent a lot of time in a hospital. I remember leaving that thinking, oh, I really want to grow up and run a hospital, because there was always this buzz of the nurses and the doctors. I was the only child in the facility. And so got to sort of just feel this hum of the hospital. And what I remember from the sophomore pilgrimage of being in the Capitol during session was feeling that same hum and buzz. People were walking around, they were moving, they were having conversations, things were happening quickly. And it was just that energy I recognized in that way.
So at that point, you're thinking about running a hospital. So how did you get from wanting to run a hospital to ended up going to law school?
So I got a degree in agriculture journalism, and quickly realized that I was not going to be able to afford myself, right? As they're talking about like journalists made, it was like, wait, I didn't really know what else I wanted to do. And so kind of went to law school as okay, let's, continuing to get some more education. Had been exposed to lawyers, like I said, through that experience, enjoyed it, went to my first year of law school and really hated it. I mean, really disliked it. Um, Felt very insecure, didn't know any lawyers, felt like everyone there was the child of a judge or of a lawyer. And there was this like secret sauce or language that I was not a part of. And so took that opportunity to then get a master's in healthcare administration at the same time. And it's actually a joint degree now, but at the time it wasn't. And they said, hey, Betsy, if you can do both of these, we'll make it a joint degree. So I'm technically the first person that's had a master's in health administration and got a law degree at the same time. And so I say that I graduated at the time that master's was in the School of Medicine. So I technically graduated from the School of Law and the School of Medicine on the same day. Not as cool as it sounds, right? I am not a physician.
Oh, I don't know. That's still pretty cool.
Yeah. But, and so now it is a joint degree that you can do. So that was always still in my mind that, okay, I would, use this law degree, but then kind of go into healthcare. But as I finished it up and did a fellowship in St. Louis with SSM, kind of realized that maybe that was going to be a little bit harder than I'd realized. I didn't have any provider background. And at that time, to really be in administration, you were seeing a lot of former nurses or former physicians. And an opportunity came up here in Jefferson City, and I took that, and it kind of forever changed the course of my life.
Well, and certainly the training that you received in medical administration is a skill that would transfer to other fields.
A lot of
I'm
lawyers
sure you've
have
utilized
not
that
had
some.
HR and and finance classes and things like that. When I lobbied, which is what I did for many years before I came to the court, did not need those things. But then as I came here and was able to transition to clerk, that master's became very helpful in ways that I would have never planned for.
So you spent some time here in Jefferson City working, and then at some point an opportunity comes for you to move over to the Missouri Supreme Court. What was that decision process like?
That was a tough decision. So at that stage in my life, I was a single mother. I had a very young child, and I had lobbied for a lot of years and had a really successful career. I was getting ready to marry and had spent so much time away from my daughter just during session and traveling. I was with a big firm. We'd had a lot of successes, but I was in St. Louis and Kansas City a lot and had just felt like my daughter was seeing the nanny an awful lot versus spending time with me. And then I was getting ready to get married with this thought that we would expand our family. Um, and this job came up. And I remember having the lobbying job, not the clerk position, but the director of government relations, and had several people reach out. And, to be honest, Matt, it was a huge pay cut. And not a lot of people in Jefferson City go from the private sector to the public sector. Usually, that's like a salmon swimming upstream. It's the opposite direction of what is quote unquote normal. And so it was a really tough decision that came over here as the government relations person and had a clerk who was serving as the interim clerk at that time who we really hit it off, and he was willing to train me and feed my curiosity because I was always in his office, this office, asking questions that maybe weren't in my job lane, but I just wanted to learn everything I could. And he really fostered that and saw something in me that I probably didn't see in myself at that stage.
And it's so awesome to have people that believe in you.
Yeah.
That even when you don't necessarily believe in yourself,
exactly.
and they see these things in you, that's like, you
Right.
may not see it, but I know you can do this.
Right. And I think you could probably do it too. Point to those 2 or 3 people throughout your life that, but for them, and they probably, don't remember my name even. Some of them professors or things along the way who just applied a little pressure in what was probably a one-off moment for them, but was life-altering to me.
So many of the guests that we've had on this podcast at this point have talked about the importance of mentors, and really it's important in every line of work, but I think in the legal profession it's even more exacerbated. It's even more important.
Well, especially for those of us who didn't grow up in it,
right.
That we just didn't, to take that and say, hey, we think we see something here. You can feel pretty insecure, like I talked about in law school, of just not feeling like I was kind of part of that it can really touch a life in a way you don't realize.
Absolutely. And you mentioned something about the call of public service and that it's not always very lucrative.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that a lot of people don't realize is all the judges in the state who take these jobs. Judges are certainly not underpaid based on what they do. But what I think a lot of people don't realize is that most every judge in the state, by taking that job, is giving up the opportunity to make more money. They could be making more money in private practice or doing other things, working for a company or doing whatever.
Oh yeah.
But they choose to do what they do and being a judge and providing that service to the community because they feel called and committed to.
Yeah, I don't think most people realize that at a bigger firm in the state of Missouri, you are hired out of law school making more than some of our judges do. Some of our Supreme Court judges do on that very first year. And that's just something that you don't realize that what they do, and they have a passion for what they're doing.
Yeah. That's part of the reason we started this whole project to begin with, is to talk to those folks and to show that passion and demonstrate.
Yeah, and shine the light. The judiciary is, I think, by far, and even when I lobbied and worked in state government, was the most mysterious branch of government. Even as an attorney, I didn't understand what that looked like. And so it's been so neat to be kind of behind the curtain. And we don't try to keep it, non-transparent. It's just one of those things that people, we're not on the news like the General Assembly or not out in front of all of the people like the governor is and should be. It's a different role. And so it's just fascinating for someone who served so long here to kind of get to say, hey, I've gotten to see all three.
Right. And, the issue with our court, it's not always that exciting.
Right.
And
absolutely.
so it's not really worthy of news coverage all the time.
Right.
But we find it fascinating and interesting.
No, I get that. It's
Well, let's pull the curtain back for him. You talk about how non-understanding and let's pull the curtain back a little bit. So ultimately you become the first female clerk of the Missouri Supreme Court. Let's start here. What did you think the job was going to be when you started?
When I started as clerk, watching the staff here, kind of monitoring. I am, the judges have their staff, which are the law clerks and their judicial assistants. But everybody else who works out of this building is quote unquote clerk staff. And so I thought it would be a lot of monitoring that, taking the cases in, making sure that the dockets were going well, working with some of our groups. So as clerk of the court, I serve as treasurer for the Missouri Bar. I spend a lot of my days signing checks sometimes because the court has instrumentalities. We have the Missouri Board of Law Examiners, which is the court's entity that works on admitting lawyers into the practice of law. Then there's the Office of Chief Disciplinary Counsel, which is the organization that is tasked with disciplining attorneys who maybe are not living up to their duty to the public. And then there's a constitutional commission on the discipline of judges, and that is the Commission on Retirement and Removal of Discipline. And so I work with them sometimes. And then we have our Office of State Courts Administrator, which is, I always say, if the court is the brain, then OSCA is the body. They implement all of the structures that the court wants in place for the judiciary. And so I knew I would be working with those groups some, probably didn't realize how entwined and how much my day-to-day would be spent with working with those groups.
Now, you mentioned a whole lot of stuff there that I'm guessing people are going to be like, holy cow, I had no idea.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you that before I became a judge and became more involved with the Supreme Court and the administration of justice and how it's handled in the state, I didn't know about any of this stuff either. So I want to talk about just a couple of those things you mentioned. First off, let's talk about the Board of Law Examiners. That's the organization that is responsible for testing and licensing all the attorneys in the state.
Correct. And it is a state specific. Twice a year, I'm working with the exams, making sure that attorney candidates are getting their information in, working with their executive director. I always laugh when we do swearing ins here at the court, that I welcome everybody who's getting sworn in to be a new lawyer, but I tell them it's the last time they ever want to see my name on something, right? That it's generally not good news after that. They do a huge job in making sure that the people who want to be lawyers are not only qualified academically and qualified in passing the test, but have the character and fitness and have made the decisions to show that they're going to have the judgment and the sense of public service to take care of the public, because it's not about protecting the profession. It's about protecting the public, because lawyers do have this ability and duty to care for the citizens, but also can easily disadvantage them if they're not completely above board.
I think that's a very fair way to put that. And in conjunction with all of
Mm-hmm.
that, you mentioned being treasurer of the Missouri Bar,
Yeah.
which is the organization that is tasked. It's basically the lawyer organization in the state where all lawyers are members of the
Correct.
Missouri Bar.
Yes, Missouri is considered a mandatory bar state, which means by order of the Supreme Court, if you are a licensed attorney in the state of Missouri, you are automatically a member of the Missouri Bar. And it's roughly 35,000 attorneys within the state who either practice or live here. So it's a large organization under the court's rules. So I have an entire division here that works on not only keeping that list updated, but making sure that they're paying, the correct dues, that they are getting the correct educational requirements every year that the court requires to keep their license in good standing, that attorneys who are out of state who want to practice, who might need a pro hoc or something to be admitted into Missouri courts, that's all handled out of the staff within my office. So it's a pretty big job.
And then you also had mentioned the Office of Chief Disciplinary Counsel, which handles complaints against lawyers, and then the Commission on the Removal and Retirement of Judges,
Right.
which handles complaints and issues involving judges. Those things are also under your purview.
Yes, yeah, they are. I work with those groups closely. Once you're a lawyer or a judge, you shouldn't be untouchable, right? You still have a duty to your clients and to the public. And so there are mechanisms where attorneys or judges who are not doing what they need to be doing correctly can be disciplined. It can be an admonition of just a letter of, hey, you may need to pay attention to this, or it could be disbarment or removal from the bench. And so both of those organizations we work very closely with. A protection of the public is very important to me. And so I work with both of those entities to make sure that no one is above what they need to be doing.
Excellent. That's excellent. And then the last organization you mentioned, and you're right, it's truly if the court is kind of the brain of how it all works, OSCA, the Office of State Court Administrator, is really the people that make everything happen.
Yeah, that's exactly.
The Supreme Court comes up with the idea, and OSCA is the organization that kind of makes it happen.
Right.
That includes all the record keeping, but it also includes all the technology and the information technology that's been developed in the last many years. And I can only imagine, talk to me a little bit about the change that you have seen in OSCA when you started 8 years ago to where we are today.
Yeah. So the head of OSCA, Kathy Lloyd, who I work very closely with, we sort of jokingly say that used to be the Office of State Courts Administrator, and we should probably call it the Office of State Courts Automator, because so much of what Missouri does, we have a robust statewide case management system that many states don't have. We are way above the curve on that with e-filing, with pay on the web, all of these services that we offer. Missouri is miles ahead of lots of other states in that way. And then, my job changed a lot in that the clerks who had my job previously would work with OSCA, but the court actually has OSCA now answer to me, which is the first study. And I believe we're the only state that does that, where there is that reporting requirement. So it makes my job as clerk very different than what others have experienced. And sometimes I jokingly say that when I became clerk here, I had never had my own personal secretary. And I went from there to, 4,000 employees indirectly, like overnight. So it is a very big task. I think Kathy and I work hand in hand more than in our reporter capacity, but it's a lot to make sure that our courts are doing what they should, have the tools that they need to do what they should, and that we are providing the right kind of transparency and information both to the executive and the legislative branch so they can make decisions about funding. There's just a myriad of things that can come across my plate on a daily basis.
Yeah. With respect to OSCA, I can only imagine that, when the buck stops at your desk and all the issues that can come up in the course of administrating hundreds of thousands of cases across the state, that can be an awful lot.
Yeah, absolutely.
You mentioned the automation changes that have been made, the expansion of our Show Me Court system that we're using. There's our electronic case management system. We're now making information publicly available,
right?
Which is new for us.
You now can get all of that information, on your phone or your iPad that before you would have to go into a court to get. Here at this building, we now live stream our arguments, not just audio, but video. You can see this court in lots of ways we've been implementing. How are we more open? How can people see what we do, pull back the curtain for everyone?
Yeah. And it's been really exciting to watch it certainly I haven't been on the front lines like you have, but to watch it as someone who participates in the system, it's been very exciting to see the opportunities that the technology is affording
Yeah.
us, and the transparency that it's helping us with. And now, instead of having to tell people, hey, well, you need to run down to your courthouse and have them pull the file and look at this, just say, hey, just log in and check it out on case night.
Right, exactly. And, I always laugh from my rural roots that I came from. Sometimes we'll go to areas and they'll say, oh, well, this is a rural area. And I'm like, yeah, but have you driven 45 miles to the nearest Walmart? That's, I
Right.
have probably a different definition. And so it's so nice when that you see the ability for people to do some of that, because I remember how hard it was to get to the courthouse or to get where you're going or to take off, work to get your family there if you didn't have a job that easily accommodated that. And no public transportation, right? It's not like there was a metro system or a bus system that could provide that. So I am always very cognizant of how would it have affected life there, or how does it affect life there, and what can we do to make it easier for all Missourians.
I love that, because I know, I was a trial judge in a rural area as well. And one of the most hotly contested issues we always had was DOR cases.
Yeah.
And it wasn't because people were really fighting the issue, but
Right.
they couldn't lose their driver's
Right.
license.
Exactly.
Because there was no public transportation. Right. There was no way to get around.
Mm-hmm.
And everything was so spread out that if you didn't have a license,
right.
you couldn't work.
Exactly.
You
right.
couldn't get your kids to school. You couldn't do the things that you needed to
exactly.
do. And so that was always such
Mm-hmm.
a big consideration. And I love that that's important to you, and that's still something that you're thinking about.
Yeah.
So with all this technology that's changed with OSCA and all the developments that we've had, is there anything on the horizon that you're kind of excited about that's still kind of coming?
Well, I think just seeing where AI is going to take us for good or for bad.
We're doing what we can as a court to kind of keep up with the changes
exactly.
in technology.
And we were so paper-based, right?
Yeah.
The law,
Mm-hmm.
the law is so paper-based, and our rules and our cases talk about, well, when things are mailed, and things aren't mailed a lot anymore,
Mm-hmm.
they're emailed. So it's been very interesting to kind of look at an organization, and by an organization, I mean a branch of government and a profession that is so paper-based, and the ways that we're transitioning to this non-paper and all the sort of unintended consequences of all that. We're a profession that maintaining the record is paramount. And what do you do when the record's online? And we want to provide it, but also, you all will issue orders in the Southern to strike something. Right. Well, how do we strike it, but we still keep it accessible for the public to see it? And how do we educate them of what do these terms mean and what does that record look like? And so we're always just balancing these competing interests.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think that as more information becomes publicly
Mm-hmm.
available, we're going to have to continue to fight that battle.
Yeah.
And provide a sufficient knowledge base to people to understand
right.
it. But with that being said, we put out detailed opinions,
Mm-hmm.
we put out information, and
right.
sometimes it doesn't always get to the people that need to know it.
Right. And we put out, as you said, detailed information in a 140 character world, right?
Right.
So how do we still do what we do when we talk about, well, writing to convince or giving these detailed analysis, when a lot of communication globally is just not detailed anymore.
Right.
And so how do we continue to honor our profession and do what we need to do for the people we serve, but still be relevant or communicate in a way that's effective?
Well, and I think that projects like this,
Mm-hmm.
and projects like the new social media pages that
right.
the court and the Missouri courts are utilizing are kind of paths to that, to help meet people kind of where they're at.
Exactly right.
Instead of saying, hey, you need to come to us, you need to come to our website, click on this article, read 5,000 words on this thing. We're going to come to you, and we're going to provide you with these morsels of information that we think are relevant to you, that we think that you're going to care about.
Correct. And it seems like, no big deal probably to those listening, but for us, it was yeoman's work and a huge cultural shift.
Huge.
Yeah.
Yes. It was a great tradition in the practice of law, and particularly in the judiciary, not necessarily lawyers per se, but lawyers and judges have a code of conduct. Yeah. We have ethical rules that we have to follow.
Absolutely.
One of our biggest ethical rules is we don't talk about stuff.
Right.
We can't talk about cases. We can't talk about clients.
Right.
We can't talk about information that we learn during the course of our jobs. And so to separate out those things that we can and can't talk about really made judges and lawyers nervous.
Right. Absolutely.
And so I think over the years, the default always was just don't say anything.
Right. When in doubt.
Yeah. When in doubt, say nothing. And then nobody can ever accuse you of getting in trouble.
Yeah.
And for a long time that worked okay. When there wasn't social media, when there wasn't all of this constant news cycle and information that's out there, And people started to ask the questions, well, why aren't you all adding to the information? Why aren't you all talking about things and giving us
Right.
some insight
Right.
into
And
how
it
these
used to
things
be
are
a thing
going?
that was a good thing, right? You
Right.
aren't. So, and then all of a sudden it was a, hey, what is a,
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah,
the view of
exactly.
what that was changed a lot.
Yeah. And so that's why I've certainly gotten on board with this project. And one of the points of this is to give information to the public, to give them kind of a glimpse inside. You know, we did a podcast that I don't know what order these are going to run in, but I know we're going to do a mailback podcast if it hasn't already run, where I talk about ethical rules and the fact that judges can't talk about certain things. And so while we can't always give every answer people want to hear, we can talk about enough to give you a pretty good idea of how it all works and what it does.
Yeah. Well, and I love that you're doing it, and I love the humanization of it. You know, it's kind of hard to see people as people when you have titles like judge or chief justice, or you know, and so it's just kind of nice to peel back and like, oh wow, these are people who are just like everybody else. You know, they watch football and they hope the Chiefs win again this year. And, they like to, you know, boat at the lake or whatever it is. That they're really just like everybody else.
Yeah. They're just people with big responsibilities. And that is absolutely part of the project that we've been working on. Now, it's interesting that you mentioned the judges here on the court. You have 7 bosses.
I do.
You have 7 different people that you have to answer to.
Yeah.
How do you balance working for 7 people?
Yeah. So that's very interesting. And it's one of those things, there is no course, no matter what degree I had, that trained me how to do that. But, you know, I think, like I said earlier, I lobbied for a lot of years, and I think that was fabulous training to really learn to study people. How do they like to communicate? How do they want their information? What motivates them? And so in ways I didn't even realize that career was such a great training ground for this career, because one, it's about relationships. I get to know them. I know what's going to maybe trip their trigger, what things they're very interested in. I learn about their families, etc. And then we have a chief justice system that is different than some states. You know, you're elected or chosen as the chief justice, but in Missouri, it rotates every 2 years. So while I work with all 7 judges all of the time, and it takes a majority of the court to make a decision, I really have to be able to serve or work more closely with one of them for a 2-year period than I might the rest. And you do have to change how you work. You know, what becomes important to them needs to be important to me, or at least I need to be very mindful of that. How they want to communicate may be very different. Their sense of humors may be different. You know, the things that we can joke about or chat about might be different.
Well, having fortunate enough to know all the judges on the Supreme Court and know that they're all wonderful people. They all have their quirks.
Yeah.
And they'd be the first one to tell you that.
Exactly.
And so I appreciate the need that you would have to adapt to as different people take the reins and lead the court forward for their period as chief. The good news is you get to work with some really great, awesome people.
Oh my gosh, they're amazing. You know, it is a lot of fun. I learn about different parts of the state that I never would have known about. You know, I think you suffered from this. We've talked about this before, but when you went to Mizzou and you were from south of the river, you know, at that time in the 90s, it just seems like a lot of kids were from northern Missouri. So, you know, people where I'm from went to University of Arkansas a lot, or Arkansas State University, maybe SMS at the time, now Missouri State. And so it's been interesting to meet so many people from northern Missouri, because there have been several, you know, Judge Fisher, Judge Russell. I've learned about those areas of the state that I was not naturally exposed to. And the court has changed so much in recent years that actually one of my bosses is someone I went to law school with. We were in the same class. And so that's been a lot of fun to kind of have that different relationship with somebody that that I kind of grew up with in that way.
Really cool. And, you know, and that's the longer you stay here, the more often you start to see the faces come back.
Oh, right. Yeah. Or, you know, at one point we had 4 judges who had been law clerks here before. When I'm doing orientation for our new law clerks, which our judges get usually every year here, you know, I always say, I want you to be a little bit afraid of me now, but when you're my boss in a few years, you know, just remember me kindly. So, but it's a very unique opportunity to realize that the people that you sort of are over today or trying to guide their work may someday be in a position to be my hiring authority. And so, always make a good impression.
Always be nice to people. I
Exactly
tell it my
right.
kids and everyone else that listen, always be nice to
Costs
people.
nothing to be kind.
You never know when that's going to
That's
come
right.
back to benefit
Exactly
you.
right.
So it certainly doesn't hurt to be
Mhm.
nice. I wanted to ask you one last thing as we're wrapping up here. And again, I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today. I know how incredibly busy you are,
No.
especially with budgets being signed and all that stuff. I know
Mhm.
you got a lot of work on your plate. You all probably don't see as many pro se litigants here at the Supreme Court.
Yeah, not walking in the door,
Yeah.
not nearly as
Mhm.
much as you would see in the circuit courts or
Yeah.
maybe even some of
But
the
you
appellate.
still have some pro se
Absolutely.
litigants that file cases here at the Supreme Court. And you're also involved in working with the
Mhm.
lower courts and
Mhm.
developing programs and processes. How have you seen the pro se litigant process change over the years that you've been working here?
Yeah, I think we're all seeing pro ses becoming more and more prevalent. And for the folks out there, pro ses are people who are representing themselves. A lot of the pro ses that we see are actually individuals who are in prison here. And so we usually communicate with them via letter, occasionally phone calls. But it is a concern not only for the courts, for me, but for the practice of law. Because what is it that we're seeing that's driving this? Is it the cost of hiring an attorney? Is it the availability of an attorney? Not to go back to where I'm from, but we are seeing places in the state where there are significantly fewer attorneys than what there used to be, especially as those who are maybe in the baby boomer age group retire out of the practice of law. We're not seeing young people return to these small towns to continue to practice. Some states have been declared legal deserts. And so I know the Missouri Bar is starting a group that's looking at that. But we want access to justice. Justice is incredibly important. And we are forever looking at no one is required to have an attorney. But how do we know attorneys are available if people need them, that they're staying reasonable, but that people also still have the right to represent themselves, but to do so in a way that doesn't put them at a disadvantage, right? And so it's a lot of balancing in that way, spinning plates kind of thing.
Absolutely.
Justice delayed is justice denied. And that delay can be not only in timing, but in access to an attorney, an ability to enter the court and know how to enter the court and use the rules so that you get an outcome that's fair.
Yep. And I think that the Supreme Court is uniquely positioned to deal
Yeah.
with that because you have, involvement with the bar side of it, the attorney side of it, and then you also have the involvement on the OSCA, the administrative side,
Yep.
and also on the rulemaking side.
Exactly.
And so I know that it's an issue that is on your all's radar that you're looking at all the time.
All the time. And I know a lot of people don't realize this, but administration of justice and the rule of attorneys and the operation of that profession is vested with the Supreme Court. So not only are the judges here just hearing cases and working on it, probably 60% of their work right now is administrative. And so we have a massive amount of committees that we staff and work through. And so we are looking at those practice issues all of the time just to make sure that we are doing the best that we can for the citizens of the state. And I think a lot of people think it is just cases, but actually at this level, it is just as much administration, if not more so sometimes.
That is so true. Betsy, I want to thank you so much for taking the
Thank
time
you.
to sit down with me and talk today. I have one last question for
Okay.
you. I always ask everybody, what's your favorite thing that you have seen lately? It could be a movie or TV show or a sunset or just a dog running through a park. What's your favorite thing you've seen lately?
My kids laugh.
Isn't that the
Yeah.
best?
Mhm.
That's
Yeah,
really good.
it is.
Well, that is a wonderful place to leave it. Betsy, thank you so much for being with
Thank
us
you.
today. And I want to thank everybody for listening and watching with us today. Don't forget to like and subscribe on our various platforms, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Also on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, all the places you find your Missouri courts. We would love to hear from you. With nothing else to discuss at this time, this podcast will be adjourned. Thanks, folks.